General Quarters! All hands to action stations and set condition 1 throughout the ship. Welcome to the USS Sitrep podcast, your flagship for all things military and historical wargaming. I am your host, Ariskini Jim, and today we're back to finish up our scenario recreating the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay. As discussed last week, the Battle of Empress Augusta Bay was a nighttime naval action fought between cruisers and destroyers of the United States and Japan. This took place near the end of the Solomon Islands campaign off the west coast of Bougainville in November 1943. We went into more detail with the background and context of this battle in last week's episode. There's a link to part 1 in the description of this video. Check it out if you're interested in that material. The system that we're using for this campaign is a new rule set I've been chewing on for a little while, and I'm trying to get a playtest done here. The working title is Gunflashes at Midnight. Normally for this kind of action we would use Naval War by H.J. Simonsbergen, but we're trying to break in some new players at the club, and historically this scenario includes 22 warships, so we're looking for something just a little lighter. So far, the scenario's running pretty well. We've got Tom playing the Americans and my lovely girlfriend Jennifer playing the Japanese, and here's a good sign. By the end of turn 3, I'm not really explaining the rules anymore. I'm just sitting back and concentrating on filming the action as it happens. And that's really what we're looking for here. A light, fast naval wargaming experience that you can take to the club and get new players stuck in with a minimum of lead time. So enough design talk, how's the actual battle going so far? Well, to be honest, pretty close to history, believe it or not. Okay, historically there were a fair number of collisions at Empress Augusta Bay, and honestly I don't have collision rules in the game yet, but Japanese long-range torpedoes are definitely proving to be a deadly threat, while American radar-controlled gunnery is proving equally lethal. And these are really the two big advantages that you see with the respective American and Japanese navies by this stage of the Pacific War. The Americans have more guns, they fire faster, and they're a lot more accurate thanks to radar-assisted fire control. The Japanese, meanwhile, again, have that long lance torpedo. Hands down the best torpedo of World War II, with an ungodly long range and a warhead like an undersea volcano on bath salts. In fact, it was American gunfire that scored the first kill on our table last week. Sustained 6-inch gunfire from the flagship USS Montpelier and her sister ship USS Columbia positively tore apart the poor little Japanese destroyer Watakazuki. Meanwhile, the Japanese hit back, however, with, again, one of those long lance torpedoes that absolutely one-shot blew apart the poor American destroyer USS Converse. Now, another of these devastating Japanese torpedoes has just hit the American flagship, again, the light cruiser USS Montpelier. Ouch. The Montpelier isn't quite sinking yet, but she's halfway there, especially since she's taken additional 8-inch gunnery hits off of the Japanese flagship, the heavy cruiser Miyoko. Yeah, I should go ahead and mention that the Japanese do have that additional advantage. They don't have the most accurate guns, they don't have the most guns, but they do have the biggest guns. Some big 8-inch haymakers on a pair of heavy cruisers. The miniature scale for our warships is 1 to 1800, but please remember that these ships do engage each other at ranges regularly extending out to 6 to 12 miles. So in most naval war games, the ship scale and the table scale have got to be wildly different. And our table scale is 2 nautical miles, or 4,000 yards, to the foot. Just something to bear in mind as we get stuck back into turn 3. So, will the Americans repeat their historical victory, or will the Japanese walk away with an upset? Let's head over to the footage and see how the rest of our Battle of Empress Augusta Bay turns out. Alright, so here we are during the fire phase of turn 3, where Jen is setting up some of her gunfire. Looks like she's targeting the American flagship, the light cruiser USS Montpelier. Her own flagship won't actually be firing this phase because she's taking evasive action. You can't use your main batteries while taking evasive action, so it's going to be the Haguro targeting the Montpelier. So we're looking at 5 turrets of big 8-inch guns, so it's going to be 5 D10s to hit. Looks like she has scored 1 hit. You need low rolls in this game. And now to roll damage, it's D6 plus those 8 inchers do plus 5 at this range. So we're talking about 8 damage versus the 7 belt armor. That's going to be 1 point on USS Montpelier. So they're taking the Montpelier apart 1 rivet at a time. She's down 6 out of 9 structure points so far. Meanwhile, the Japanese have lost 2 destroyers total versus the Americans have lost 1 destroyer. So at the moment, the Americans are winning slightly. Japanese destroyers are worth 2 victory points. American destroyers are worth 3. Thus, at the moment, the score is 4-3 for the Americans. But again, the ships are now closing in range, and not only that, they've all started to accumulate additional damage. Not only do your chances to hit go up as the range continues to close, not only does your damage go up as the range closes, but more guns come into play, because now everybody's secondary batteries, all those 5-inchers, really start to pop off. Now we're starting the movement phase on turn 4, and yeah, both players are starting to get a little more cagey with their maneuver, because again, the range is closing, the damage is piling up, especially on both sides' flagships. Those flagships go down, not only is that going to be a lot of points and firepower, but you're going to lose a lot of orders as well. So, long story short, take your first shot, things are about to get kinda hairy. Movement is now complete. Movement in this game is very simple. It's 10 inches for a cruiser and 12 inches for a destroyer, because all these ships have very generally the same rough speed. You see these small blue turning wheels that we've been using. 2-inch turning wheel for a destroyer, a 3-inch turning wheel for a cruiser. And now it's time for Tom to start his gunnery. So here we see Destroyer Division 45. This is Captain Arleigh Burke. Of course, this is the guy for whom our Arleigh Burke class destroyers are named after today. Has pretty much peppered both of these Japanese destroyers, the Shigori and the Naganami. In fact, one of them is already down 2 out of 4 structure points. She's already halfway sunk. So yeah, this is a savage little fight over here to the west. Now these 3 American Cleveland-class light cruisers, that's going to be Cleveland, Columbia, and Denver, open fire. And so far, Cleveland has scored a 6-inch gun hit on the Japanese flagship Myoko. That's despite Miyoko's evasive action. It only gives you a modifier, it doesn't make you immune to gunfire. And one of those hits turned out to be a crit, so you roll d6s to damage, and if that result is a 6, you get a crit. We roll on a table and it gives you additional results. In this case, maneuvering problems. So at the moment, Myoko cannot steer. Maybe there's a fire in the maneuvering room, or the rudder's jammed, who knows. Now the Columbia is going to open fire, scores another hit, which turns out to be another crit against the hull. So that's going to be 1 more point of damage against Miyoko's structure, and the crit turns out to be another maneuvering hit. So now, Jen is going to have to spend some of her orders, she only has so many, on damage control, and for every order that she spends in that, she gets a d6 to roll to attempt to get rid of one of those system damage counters. Now the Myoko only has 1 structure point left. USS Denver has a chance to finish off the Japanese flagship with a 6-inch broadside, but all of her guns miss. What a heartbreaker. Here's some Japanese return fire from the light cruiser Sendai, who has scored a hit and scored a crit. Notice that 6 there. That 3, by the way, that's an odd and evens check to see whether it hit the hull or the superstructure. Odd means it hits the hull. And poor little Sendai, she only carries 5.5-inch guns. She's basically a glorified destroyer. She doesn't do enough damage to get through the belt armor of her target, the Montpelier, and unfortunately for the Sendai, crits only count if they penetrate the armor. Now for the big Japanese guns aboard the heavy cruiser Haguro, who barely has a broadside on the USS Montpelier. Notice all of these bases have that X there that not only shows the ship's true location, but also the arcs. So again, she has 5 big turrets of 8-inch guns. 2 of them have scored hits, so now we're going to resolve the hits one at a time. And it's a crit right off the bat. Holy crap. Alright. So that is going to be 6 plus 3 makes 9 total damage points in the hull. Again, that D10 odds evens tell you whether it hits in the hull or the superstructure. So that's going to be some additional hits, and then the 3 for the crit. In the hull, it's going to be engine, so she's down temporarily to half speed, until again, Tom can spend some damage control orders to hopefully roll to take care of that. Alright, but again, Haguro scored 2 hits, so now Jen's going to roll the effects for her second hit. Another crit! Holy crap, the Japanese are not messing around here. Alright, so it's going to be a crit on the superstructure. 6 plus 3 is 9 versus 5 armor. That's going to be Well, first we'll do the actual crit location, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be enough to actually sink the USS Montpelier, I'm sorry to say. That is the flagship for Rear Admiral Merrill, who is now going to be in a rowboat. It's time for him to transfer his flag. We'll show you guys how that works in just a second. So here we are at the end of the turn, and this is where we do the damage control we were talking about. Every ship gets 2 orders to maneuver and fire their guns, and then also flagships generate additional orders, flagship orders, that the player can distribute as they see fit. And Jen is going to put some additional orders into damage control, and then also to transfer her command from the Miyoko to the Haguro, because the Miyoko is about to go down. So Rear Admiral Amori is in a launch or a cutter. It takes 1 turn for every 6 inches between the 2 ships, and again, you have to go by that center point on the base, but they're within 6 inches, so the flag is now on the Haguro. The Americans, meanwhile, long story short, take your second shot, don't really have a choice. Rear Admiral Merrill has to abandon the Montpelier for the Columbia because the Montpelier is burning down to the waterline. She's basically going to sink in the next few hours. Wrapping up movement on turn 4, we see where on some places on the table, ranges are getting absurdly short. We have opposing destroyers now within 1 foot of each other. That's 2 nautical miles or 4,000 yards. Meanwhile, over here, it's not a collision, it's intentional. We have the destroyer USS Foot taking off survivors from the stricken Montpelier. Remember, when a ship is sunk, it doesn't just disappear off the table. These ships sometimes take days to sink. And yeah, the Americans have lost a destroyer and a light cruiser, and the Japanese have lost 2 destroyers. Don't look now. Right now, the Japanese are winning. Here we have Arleigh Burke, once again commanding Destroyer Squadron 45, releasing the last of his pocket torpedoes. If he's going to use them, he has to use them now, because again, torpedoes don't hit until the following turn, and next turn is the last turn of the game, so again, it's now or never. So as Captain Burke said, I think it was in this battle, my guppies are swimming. Yes, his torpedoes are in the water. American gunfire just suddenly shits the bed. So yeah, all the main batteries on USS Denver miss, then USS Cleveland misses. Luckily, Tom finally manages to land some hits with USS Columbia, who finally lands just the right amount of 6-inch gunfire to finally sink the long-suffering Miyoko. So there goes the Japanese flagship. Jen's already transferred her flag, but yeah, that is the end of the Miyoko. So here's a good illustration about how we do lines of sight and arcs of fire. Again, that X in the center of the ship shows the ship's actual location, and the arms of the X, of course, show the arcs, port, starboard, forward, aft. However, we do use the entire base to determine whether or not an intervening ship blocks line of sight, because there are safety margins and these guys are shooting at night and so on. Alright, so Japanese light cruiser Agano can't hit that first destroyer, can hit the second, but it will affect the range. And thus it does also affect the chance to hit. So only 1 actual salvo is going to hit. Again, that's partly because of these line of sight questions that we wanted to resolve. And she rolls a 1 for damage, so yeah, 0 effect against the belt armor of the target. Another Japanese hit, however, had a lot more luck. In fact, Jen scored a crit. So then we roll another d6 on the critical hit hull chart in this case. Jen rolled a 5, so it looks like it's going to be a flooding counter to be assessed against USS Stanley. USS Denver just got absolutely hammered, especially by the heavy cruiser Haguro, probably a little bit of payback for what happened to her sister ship Miyoko. But yeah, Denver is now down 6 out of 9 structure points. We're probably going to see some evasive action counters there, because we're now entering the last turn of the game. We're going to execute movement and then resolve those torpedo hits, and who wants to lose a light cruiser on the last turn of the game? Beginning turn 6, you always start off with movement, and yes, both sides are now moving their ships. Again, it's 10 inches for a cruiser, 12 inches for a destroyer, 2-inch turning wheels for destroyers. You'll notice Jen is using a 3-inch turning wheel to move her light cruiser Sendai. And speaking of which, Jen, what in God's name are you doing with Sendai? She's come hard about, but she is now perfectly broadsided at point-blank range by 2 Cleveland-class light cruisers.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Okay, long story short, take your 3rd shot. That is a bad part of town, Sendai. Unless your new name is Kamikaze, you need... Okay, good. She's got additional inches of movement. She's not staying there. Yeah, you do not want to end your movement there. That would literally be the last thing you ever did. Suffice it to say that order has broken down. We have complete madness, utter chaos at point-blank range. I tell you what, this battle no longer really resembles Empress Augusta Bay. This is starting to look like the infamous Barroom Brawl, part of, I think it was the Second Battle of Guadalcanal, almost exactly a year before this, in November of 1942, where this is kind of what you saw. And I've heard one historian say that if anyone tries to tell you they have an accurate track chart for the Barroom Brawl, they're lying through their teeth. Nobody has an accurate track chart for that battle, and that's starting to resemble what we have here on our table. Okay, now we're going to resolve these last American torpedoes. Jen was actually able to maneuver most of her ships out of the arcs of those American torpedoes so that those torpedoes couldn't hit anything no matter what Tom rolled. Only one American torpedo spread might have a chance to possibly clip the stern of the heavy cruiser Haguro. So we've taken our measurements, and now we're going to roll the dice. Okay, so even at point-blank range, American torpedoes only hit on a 3 because American torpedoes. However, he does have 2 racks of them, so he'll get 2 dice. And a 10 and a 9, that's just crap dice. Sorry, Arleigh Burke, your last guppies did not swim the right way. And yeah, Haguro was missed, and that's the last of the American torpedoes. American destroyers are still kicking ass. I mean, they only have 5-inchers, but at this range, a 5-incher really kicks hard. We talk about 5-inchers like they're smaller guns. It's a 127mm cannon. And again, at this range, at less than 2 nautical miles, they have now done enough damage to sink another Japanese destroyer. They're basically crossing the T at this moment. And now this other destroyer is going to try and hit the second Japanese destroyer here. Scored 3 hits, and yeah, that's enough to put her under as well. So yeah, again, between point-blank range, a lot more guns coming to bear, and accrued damage carried over from previous turns, we are now knocking down ships much, much more quickly than we were earlier. Here we are once again, looking at the crazy little Sendai, the Japanese light cruiser who couldn't. She can't hit anything, but so far she's weathered fire off of those 2 American destroyers. They just can't get through her armor. But now she faces the aft gun batteries. Again, only aft, you have to pay attention to the arcs. Only the aft batteries off that last American light cruiser there. That's the Cleveland. And again, Cleveland is closer and firing bigger guns, so yeah. This time, the damage starts to get through the belt armor and superstructure just that fast. Sendai is already halfway to sinking. And just to quickly illustrate what I was saying before, just in this last fire phase, 5 ships have already gone down, starting with those 2 Japanese destroyers here. This American destroyer, these 2 Japanese destroyers that we saw sunk a little bit earlier, although, again, all gunfire is simultaneous, so they took that American destroyer with them. And there's another Japanese destroyer sunk elsewhere on the table. So yeah, we're now at the part of the game where everything starts to die really quick. Sendai is going to go ahead and shoot back at the Cleveland. The difference here is that the Sendai has the Cleveland broadsided, so at least Sendai is going to get to fire all of her main guns. But they're only 5.5-inch guns. They only do +3 damage, even at this point-blank range. She really was a very tiny little light cruiser. So we roll damage, that's going to be 5 + 3, again for the range. That's going to do 1 net damage against the belt armor. And then 4 + 3, that's going to wind up matching the belt armor and thus no damage. But still, Sendai managed to inflict 1 little point of damage against the Cleveland. Yay, Sendai finally did something. Then comes the Haguro. In contrast, the big Japanese heavy cruiser fires her last broadside and scores 3 hits. That's going to be very bad news for her target. That is USS Cleveland, by the way. But then Jen rolls a 1 for damage, so yeah, 1 + 6 = 7, that matches the armor. 1 + 6 matches the armor, again, no damage. Finally, 3 + 6 = 9, that beats Cleveland's belt armor by 2, that's going to be 2 points of damage against the Cleveland. Cleveland has suffered some additional hits from some other Japanese ships, including a crit that inflicted that command counter you see there on the turn record sheet. That was rolled here, a number 1 on the superstructure critical hit table. So yeah, it's -1 order. So what happened is, maybe the captain is wounded, maybe he's lost some of his officers, maybe the intercom gear is down. Somehow or another, Cleveland is having difficulty with orders for the rest of this turn. And now we have the very last fire action of the game. The little Japanese destroyer Hatsukaze is going to open fire against the destroyer USS Spence, and has scored 2 hits. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and roll for some damage. Yeah, look how close these ships are. Now again, the Hatsukaze is sinking, but again, all fire is simultaneous. So we do have a hit on the hull, but it is a crit. So we're going to go ahead and resolve that. That's going to be 9 on the hull. That is going to be 4 points of damage. And again, then we do the actual crit resolution. It's going to inflict maneuvering damage. And that is going to be another 3 plus 3 is 6 on the hull. That's going to be another point of damage. And that's going to be just enough to sink the American destroyer USS Spence. And yeah, that concludes the last fire phase. You see the smoke there on USS Spence. And that is going to wrap up turn 6 and thus the game. So yeah, this turned out to be quite the bloody one. Let's go ahead and point this up. Alright, so we've come up with a scoring system. Because this battle was weighted in favor of the Americans, historically the Americans just had a lot of advantages here. The point system, you'll notice, is slightly skewed in Japan's favor because the Japanese really can't win this battle, but we want to make sure that they can still win the game. So they sank 1 American light cruiser, so it's going to give them 4 points, and 3 destroyers. That'll be a total of 13 points. Meanwhile, the Americans sank 6 Japanese destroyers. I think that's all their destroyers. They're 2 points apiece, so that'll be 12. And then 1 heavy cruiser, that is 16 to 13. So yeah, there's the score. The Americans do still win, but it's not quite the complete one-sided slaughter that the table might suggest. Because the Americans definitely got their teeth kicked in. They lost 1 American cruiser and another one is quickly retiring. But the Japanese are down to really just 2 ships. And yeah, one last quick pan of the actual table before we start taking things down. This is kind of what we were looking for. I mean, the real battle wasn't nearly this bloody. Both sides slapped each other around a little bit historically and then basically retired. But here, they really went in for sort of a knife fight in a phone booth kind of a battle. You know, point blank range in the dark, absolutely hammering each other. Yeah, you see where the USS Montpelier is sinking, and then just off the bottom of the screen, there she is. USS Denver is retiring. That might be the actual move that won the game when Tom made the correct decision to retire with USS Denver. Because if Denver had gone down, that would have been just more points for the Japanese. And we saw how close the actual score wound up being. Meanwhile, little Sendai actually survived. One of the few ships that actually sank in the historical event, somehow she survived. So that's our game, and hope you guys enjoyed it. And there we have it, folks. With a score of 16 to 13, the Americans are walking away with a narrow, bloody victory on this one. Of course, in the historical battle of Empress Augusta Bay, both sides suffered far less damage, but you see that in a lot of historical war games. I mean, it's a lot easier to be brave and reckless with little toys than it is with real ships and men. Overall, I'm rather pleased with the results of the first playtest, although I do see some things I want to adjust right away, like the flagship order system. There just isn't enough to do with them to make flagship orders that important. I also want to beef up the night fighting rules, and I definitely want to add some collision rules. Normally, I hate putting in collision rules because the players just instantly want to start crashing into each other and the whole game turns into a demolition derby. But historically, these things did happen, and quite often, so we do have to put them in the game. But the players picked it up right away, they definitely seemed to enjoy it, and the game did provide some feel of realistic World War II naval tactics. So who knows, maybe this is something we'll do again in the future. And that's where we're going to leave it for now, folks. Thanks very much for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Please remember to hit that notification bell. Also, please consider joining the Sitrep Podcast Discord. There is an auto-accept invitation link to our Discord in the description of this video. Join our community, see what everybody's up to, and best of all, show us what's happening on your hobby table. But for now, this is Oriskany Jim with the Sitrep Podcast. We are rounds complete for another episode. And as always, Tango Mike for watching.